turning 13. That was his number one wish, and hopefully we don't go down and see him lose in the first game. So, well, no, of course not. I didn't. It's no great burden. I told Tiffany, I was like, if you want to be the one to take him, that's fine. She's like, yeah, you go ahead. Like, happy for you to take him. So, yeah, so I'm quite excited to go myself. So, a week from today, on the 15th, yeah. Yours is the 16th? No kidding. Well, y'all are right there beside each other. Yeah, very cool. Are you going to the SEC tournament for your birthday? No? Oh, okay. Well, very good. Yeah, so we'll see. He loves March Madness. I love March Madness. So we were watching, all that was unfolding yesterday to see what the scenarios were. He went to the game at Rupp yesterday with his grandparents, but he was tracking everything, and we saw Dan Hurley handle his loss so elegantly. He does, yeah. So, but we were watching all that unfold, watching Duke be way better than we care for them to be, but they are. So, yeah, it's fun. This is a hymnal. Oh, I do have one Duke shirt, and I actually wore it on campus. It has the D and the E marked out. It's got the UK Center, and I did wear that around campus, and it was noticed. Yeah, but no, I don't have any Duke gear that I wear around in secret. So, no. But I have been in Cameron many times rooting against Duke. Whoever's playing them, that's who I'm rooting for. So, yeah, I am jealous of what a great atmosphere it is in Cameron, though. It's a special place. But anyways, no secret fanhood. I mean, part of the reason is because, like, one of my formative childhood memories is the Leitner shot. I mean, it's one of the earliest memories I have of UK basketball fanhood, and I remember the shot being hit and running from the living room to my bedroom and slamming the door and just burying my face in the pillows and crying, and my parents knocking at the door, and I'm like, go away. I just remember it. This was the first time I wrestled with the problem of evil in the world. It's the first time. How could a just God let such unjust results happen? Yes, exactly. So.
To eventually remember where he was. It was the Leitner shot in 9/11.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
I still remember him in the den. He was 8 at the time. I remember him. It was serious.
Yeah. Did y'all see the Super Bowl commercial for the UK Federal Credit Union that had Leitner in it, where they're saying the credit union's for everybody, and they're like, even me, and then Leitner's like, even me, and like, maybe not you. That's pretty good. He does, yes, which almost makes it worse because I don't want to like him, but he seems like a great guy, which. Stop it. I need you to be a villain. Let's go ahead and get started, and we'll pick up where we left off in Hebrews. Last week we didn't meet because we had another visit from a company that's working with our sound and camera system, and one of the things that they installed and was training us on last week is this camera that's hanging down from the balcony. So if you're watching this on live stream, this is the grand debut of our new camera. So, but it's very cool. It can rotate 360, and it can zoom in and get an uncomfortably close shot of me in HD if we wanted it to. So it's pretty cool. All right, so. Let's look at Hebrews. I believe we had just finished chapter 4, and so we're going to get into chapter 5 here, and see. Wait a minute, is that right? Actually, did we get through chapter 5? No. We got all the way to chapter 7, I believe. Yes, that's where we are. We're in chapter 7. So. So here, just to recall what we had gotten to last time, 2 weeks ago, there is this repeated referencing and warning to the audience here, not to fall away, not to stray on a different path. And there is this repeated hearkening back to the stories of the Israelites in the wilderness, and the way these stories are they're just drawn upon, these different characters and stories. It's almost like the Hebrew Scriptures is this author's native tongue. I don't know if you ever have known somebody that just almost speaks in Bible passages, but maybe you know some that speak in made-up Bible passages. But this, whether it is a preacher preaching Hebrews, some think it's a sermon, whether it's more of a letter. Regardless, this author, the speaker, really does use these old stories as their native tongue, and it just flows, mixes stories, and draws out implications and warnings from them. And so there does seem to be a worry or a concern that people are kind of losing interest, beginning to stray to other paths than to follow Jesus. So whether that's because people just aren't showing up to the gathering anymore, or because there's some drama and people are just like, you know what, this isn't worth it, or maybe they've been drawn into some other beliefs that are kind of like making it look more like another pagan religion than, say, the worship of Christ. Whatever it is, the author's very concerned about this. And so there's going to be a renewed theme here where Jesus is described as being even greater than these other historic figures. So we've already seen angels referred to as being something that is held high in the Jewish imagination. Jesus is much greater. Different prophets. God spoke through the prophets of old, but now Jesus has spoken through his Son, right? So there's going to be another character brought in here, and as a way of describing Jesus, and maybe this character looms large in the Jewish imagination of the time. So, would someone start reading in Hebrews chapter 7, starting in verse 1?
This King Melchizedek of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham as he was returning from feeding the kings, and blessed him, and to him Abraham apportioned 1/10 of everything. His name in the first place means King of Righteousness. Next, he is also King of Salem, that is, King of Peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. So how great he is! Even Abraham the patriarch gave him 1/10 of the spoils. And those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to collect tithes from the people, that is, from their kindred, though these also are descended from Abraham. But this man who does not belong to their ancestry collected tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had received the promises.
All right, can we just stop there? Does anybody remember much about Melchizedek? We've got to go way back in Genesis. So if you want, go ahead and put your finger here in Hebrews 7, and let's turn back to Genesis 14. See who in the world this figure is. Now remember, Genesis chapter 12 is a really big pivot in the book of Genesis. So if you remember, Genesis 1 and 2 are two different creation stories about how God brought the cosmos into being. Genesis 3 kind of tells the fall of creation, you know, the banishment from the Garden of Eden. And you have these different stories following the fall there, where God is trying to fulfill God's purpose for creation, but it seems like things just keep going worse and worse. You've got the violence, the first murder with Cain and Abel, and by the time you get to Noah and the ark, the story begins with God noticing that the whole earth is full of violence and injustice. And so So this the flood is like a reset, and it's just God sees at the flood. This is just the story. I'm not really unpacking this much, just describing and observing how the story is told in Genesis. But at the flood, God realizes that the hearts of humans are just bent towards evil, and like this is just kind of, it is what it is. But God hangs God's bow in the sky, the rainbow hangs God's bow in the sky as a way of saying, battle's over, like I'm all in on making it work in some way. And things, even after the flood, they're still not going well. God's purposes for what God wanted in creation, this communion between humans and each other, and humans and creation, and humans and God, it's becoming a dumpster fire. And the grand sort of pronouncement of creation's prospects happens at the end of chapter 11, where we see that Abram and Sarah are married, and Sarah is without child. It's a way of saying that through this character, you can see there's not much of a future here. And so that's when we have chapter 12 with the big pivot, the unleashing of God's new plan. He calls Abram from his parents' household and Sarah and says, I'm going to make you into a great nation, a great family, and through you I will bless all nations. So it's a big pivot. God decided that I'm going to steer creation towards my dream for it, my purposes for it, through blessing the world, overcoming violence and everything with blessing them through this family. Abraham and Sarah, they are blessing incarnate. They are the prism through which God is going to flood the world with blessing, literally going to bless the hell out of creation. Like that's the idea. So we've just reached that moment, and we get to Genesis 14, where this figure, Melchizedek, comes in. Anyone who is not made queasy with names and is willing to just give it a shot, want to read Genesis 14, starting in verse 1?
In the days of King Amraphel of Shinar, King Arioch of Elasar, King Chedorlaomer of Elam, and King Tidal of Golan, these kings made war with King Bera of Sodom, King Bersha of Gomorrah, King Shinab of Admah, King Shemer of Zebonim, and the king of Bela, that is Zor. All these joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Dead Sea. 12 years they had served Chedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him came and subdued the Rephaim in Ashtaroth-Kanim, the Zunim in Ham, the Emim in Sheva Kiriathim, and the Borites in the hill country of Sar, as far as Elphram on the edge of the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to Enisphpat, that is Kadesh, and subdued all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who lived on Azazam Tamar.
All right, let's just pause there. First of all, that's amazing that you just went through that. Well done, sir. I just want to say, yeah, well done. So this has given us a history of what? Like this, Israel doesn't exist, right? Yet. I mean, we have Abraham and Sarah that have been called forth, but like they haven't had any children yet. It's just the two of them. So we're getting kind of a history of all those who are in power while they're kind of out wandering, waiting on God to put some movement on that promise to them, right? Put some feet on this blessing the world into what God dreams it to be. But God's issued the promise, but you still got all these kings in the region and all these people of power kind of moving history right along with different folks trying to gain victory over one another. And one of the things that's mentioned there, Rephaim and Ashtoreth Karnaim. So Ashtaroth is, you're going to see over and over in the Hebrew scriptures where some of the kings are of Israel, by the time they enter the story, are going to be judged by whether or not there are Asheroth poles that are put up or preserved, or whether or not they're torn down, because these are religious symbols and worship tools for Asheroth. And so, anyways, those show up. But a lot of the peoples that are mentioned here become kind of enemies that Israel has to deal with. But you can just see just the context that there's a lot of kings and people in power, and all we have is just Abram and Sarah kind of wandering around in the midst of all this. So, all right, John, do you mind to pick back up in verse 8?
Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zor, went out and they joined battle in the valley of Sidon with King Chedorlaomer of Elam, King Tidal of Goin, King Amraphel of Shinar, and King Arioch of Elisar, 4 kings against 5.
By the way, anybody ever watch Game of Thrones? Anybody? No? So you got Game of Thrones that's going on here, right? You got the king of the north, and you got the king of this region, and the Lannisters going against you got all this going on. So, by the way, there's 2 cities there mentioned, Sodom and Gomorrah. Does that ring a bell? Yeah, major cities here. Okay, go ahead, keep going.
Now the valley of Sidon was full of bitumen pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. So the enemy took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who lived in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew who was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite brother of Eshcol and of Aner. These were allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his nephew had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. He divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and routed them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all of the goods, and also brought back his nephew Lot with his goods, and the women and the people. After his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went to meet him in the valley of Savel, that is, the king's valley, and King Melchizedek of Salem brought out bread and wine. He was priest to God Most High.
All right, let's pause there. Okay. So this part of the action story, right, you've got the king Chedorlaomer, however we say that, attacked Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot, who was Abram's nephew, Abram and Sarah's nephew, he was captured, right? Word comes to him, Abram and Sarah living over by the oaks of Mamre, which is same place. Remember the famous story where the 3 angels come to Abram and Sarah when they're very old, and they say, you're going to be with child. That's the oaks of Mamre is where they are. So word comes to Abram and Sarah, and your nephew Lot's been captured. And so Abram's like, And so he rounds up the forces, and he goes and he rescues Lot, and they got some spoils of their battle, and they bring it back, and then they encounter this person, Melchizedek, who is a king and also high priest. So let's go ahead and pick up there in verse 19.
He blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram, by God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. Then the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have sworn to the Lord God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or sandal thong or anything that is yours, so that you might not say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take your share.
Okay. So he comes back with Lot and the people that have rescued Lot. They've got some of the spoils of what they've been victory over, who they've defeated. And you have King Melchizedek of, did you catch that? Where he's the king of? Verse 18? Salem. Interesting. Very interesting. So you have the king of Sodom. You have the king of Salem. When Abram comes back with Lot, who's a resident of Sodom, you've got the king of Sodom that's rejoicing, but you also have King Melchizedek of Salem, who brings out bread and wine as a priest of the God Most High. Does anybody have a footnote for that line right there? The Hebrew says El Elyon. So it's this God, the God of Leon. So it's a priest of God. This is not, Melchizedek is not some priest that worked in the temple, right? We haven't gotten that point in the story. This is not somebody who wandered in the wilderness and succeeded Aaron as priest in the tabernacle. Melchizedek is this king of Salem and priest of this God of Elyon. And Salem, many scholars think, may have been ruling in a place that has Salem in the name, maybe Jerusalem, right? And that's why he may be such an important figure that is referenced back. But it's quite odd to see kind of a pagan king and priest play such a pivotal role that's then referenced again. But the fact of where he was and the story of blessing Abram and referencing the God maker of heaven and earth being blessed, and there being this giving a tenth, a tithe, as being kind of a model of what comes forward later, ends up being kind of something that's pretty critical. Okay, so now let's go back to Hebrews. Yes.
I'm misunderstanding the conversation between Abram and the king of Sodom. Because the king of Sodom says, yeah, give me the people. I assume you captured him before he's north when you rescued Lot. But keep everything else for yourself.
Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself.
Why is it Sodom's to give? Is it? Why is it the king of Sodom to give? So why does Abram say, I wouldn't take anything?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's saying that, so then the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have sworn to the Lord God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal thong or anything that is yours, so that you might not say I've made Abram rich. So I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten and the share of the men who went with me. So so you're saying, why is Sodom saying, why does Sodom have the authority to give,
What Abram has taken. Abram went north of Damascus, and what is now Syria, got Lot back, comes back here. Now we're having this kind of celebration with Melchizedek,
Mhm.
where he's doing the kind of last supper sort of bread and wine thing with Abram now. And then Sodom's the king of Sodom's standing around as one of the other kings, and he's saying, hey, you get to keep what you took from the folks up north.
Mm-hmm.
Why is he even in a position? I don't see why Abram even looks at him and says, who are you to say what I keep and what I don't?
I see. Because if you look at verse 8, then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and they joined battle in the valley of Siddim with King Chedorlaomer of Elam, king of Tidal and Goyim, king of Ameraphel Shinar, and king of Arioch of Elazar, blah, 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 4 against 5. Now the valley of Siddim,
And the king of Sodom and his fleet, some of them fell into the Tartars.
exactly, yeah. So the enemy took, there in verse 11, so the enemy took the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way, and they also took Lot. So when Abram does this rescue effort, he's bringing back what was taken from King Sodom's, the king of Sodom's kingdom, whatever.
I misunderstood that there was some conflict between Abram and Sodom. He's doing Sodom, the king of Sodom, a favor.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, of course, Abram is not in it for the king of Sodom. He's in it for Lot, right? But he's bringing back people and treasures that were taken from Sodom. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. All right, so we got Melchizedek. Interesting figure. All right. By the way, why are these names not in style anymore? Why is nobody naming Chedorlaomer? Like, what's up with that? I feel like there's some good names in there. I feel. Well, that's true. Yes. Well, so yes and no. So it says he's a priest of the Most High, but the Hebrew there says, he's a priest of El Elyon. So he's presented as someone who is a God worshiper, the God of Israel, but the fact that he was also kind of a king and priest of this area that's really not part of this family, he's kind of a separate thing. But do you have something different?
Well, no, my text just says he was priest of God Most High. It doesn't reference being a priest of anything else. It says he's the king of Salem.
Yeah.
Footnote of Salem is Jerusalem.
Yes.
And then also goes ahead to say that he's the priest of God Most High. But it doesn't reference another.
Right. So the Hebrew there actually says the priest of El Elyon, or Elyon, transliterated in Hebrew, which can have different meanings, but it is a Most High God, but a God worshipped in that region. But he also references the God of Abraham and Sarah as the creator of heaven and earth. So he would be what we would call like somebody that recognizes multiple gods and is worshiping multiple gods, but one of them, the thing that he is so credited for, is that he sees the God of Abraham and Sarah as being creator of heaven and earth, and offering blessing on behalf of, and seeing sort of that God's sort of superior position is part of why I think his importance, and because of the region of Jerusalem, what would become Jerusalem. So there's some history there. You could see it on multiple levels that, for those who like sort of place the temple, like later in history, who decide to put the temple in Jerusalem, stories like that are going to try to show you that there is worship of our God that has a deep history here, and going back to Melchizedek. So that story would be pretty important for why are we putting the throne and the temple here, say, versus somewhere else, like where we know other people wanted it to be. So, yeah. But he definitely, is he a pagan king that with other gods that he serves as priest for? Yes. Is he also acts in a priestly role for the God of Israel here? Yes. He does both. And yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Before me. Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Okay. So, what does this have to do with Jesus, you might ask? Well, that's where the preacher, author of Hebrews, says, let me tell you. So, let's go back to, where are we? Were we in chapter 7, verse 11? Does somebody want to, well, let's revisit what we read in chapter 7. So does chapter 7, verse 1. This king Melchizedek of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham as he was returning from defeating the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned 1/10 of everything. His name, in the first place, means king of righteousness. Next, he is also king of Salem, that is, king of peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. What is the author saying here? This is Melchizedek is almost a prefiguring of the Messiah, right? Whoa. So interesting. Just pointing out that Melchizedek may not have been someone with a kind of history or genealogy that you might expect to be something that would be critical, but in fact, he ended up being quite critical and even blessed Abraham and ruled in the place of peace that would be so important to come. And he's saying there's a prefiguring of Jesus, who you might say doesn't come from the right stock. You know, you don't expect something pretty magnificent to come of him. And yet, he may just be the kind of ruler of peace in ways that you would not expect, with long ramifications. So and then in verse 4, as it continues, see how great he is. Even Abraham, the patriarch, gave him a tenth of the spoils. And those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to collect tithes from the people, that is, from their kindred, though these also are descended from Abraham. But this man, who does not belong to their ancestry, collected tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had received the promises. It is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. In the one case, tithes are received by those who are mortal, in the other by one of whom it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins or the ancestry of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. So in other words, author is saying here that Abraham, who is the recipient of God's promise, this grand reset for the whole plan that is still unfolding, that Jesus is a part of, blessing creation into God's dream. Abraham and Sarah, who are the recipients of that promise, then turn to Melchizedek, who is of a different ancestry, and still receives a tenth of the tithe from Abraham. And this becomes a model that's used in worship. And so, why do you think this might be brought up now? And again, remember that part of what the author or the speaker here is worried about is kind of falling away, straying away. Do you think maybe there's worry about any tithes and offerings? I don't know. That could be something, maybe. Or maybe the fact that people are starting to give in to maybe some argument about Jesus that kind of is the human story of who he's from and where he's from, that's becoming like a source of like discrediting that's maybe working in and sowing down. I don't know, but were you getting ready to say something?
That's what I was thinking, is that he's saying, in this case, Melchizedek was a superior of Abraham because he was in a position to give a blessing to him. And Melchizedek's not, like you were saying, of the Abrahamic line. And so if people were saying, hey, who is this guy, son of Joseph, to be exalted in such a stature, and maybe the author is saying, this doesn't all come from birth, or we don't have to trace genealogy, such slaves to it. Like, I forget which one, Mark or Luke. One of them traces back to Adam, which would be more consistent with this, and the other traces back to Abraham.
Yeah. So it could be the case that this group of Hebrews, Hebrew Christians primarily, maybe they are struggling with the role of Gentiles in the church, what to make of them. Maybe they're struggling with this notion of Jesus's ancestry. Maybe they're struggling with, maybe there is lack of financial support with those of means to care for the whole community, that the poor among them are cared for. Who don't know? It could be all of those things. It could be a combination of some of them. It could be something completely different. But that figure is picked. Again, this author, his native tongue are these stories, and he pulls out Melchizedek because he feels like that is a point. The person without the kind of, that sits kind of outside the family tree and yet has this critical role that is prefiguring so much. The author is using this very intentionally. Such an interesting choice.
In the Jewish faith that can become priests, the Levites,
Do what?
are the only ones that can become rabbis or priests within the Jewish faith, the Levites.
So like in the if Aaron is sort of your original, kind of like coming through that line, the Levites being sort of that priestly tribe that officiates and works the worship. Yes, that would be it is true that sort of in the cultic practices in which there is a temple, they are the ones that are the priestly figures. However, when there is exile and there is no place of worship in these cultic practices where priests are the ones that officiate, the sacrifices and the prayers in the temple, what becomes really important in exile? Well, as we talked about, Torah reaches its form as we know it in exile. The books and the stories that we know of, they become more central because the written word becomes more important when you don't have a central place of worship. And when you don't have a central place of worship, the priest becomes a little more irrelevant, but the rabbi who can teach from a text becomes quite more important. So the rabbi coming from priest of Levi really doesn't matter. That's not really so much a thing. It's just a teacher. So the Pharisees, for instance, that Pharisoi, that movement of, they were a people that were very much wanted to make Torah relevant to the everyday lives of everyday people, and that was their whole thing. They very much wanted to carry forth the tradition of their elders and the interpretation of Torah and make that central to the people. So they are a people of the text. Okay. So let's see, where did we leave off? Verse 11? Yeah, I think that's where we left off. Somebody want to start reading in verse 11 going forward?
Perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, but people received the law under this priesthood. What further need would there have been to speak of another priest arising according to the order of Melchizedek, rather than one according to the order of Aaron? For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. Now the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, and in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. It is even more obvious when another priest arises resembling Melchizedek, one who has become a priest, not through a legal requirement concerning physical descent, but through the power of an indestructible life. For it is attested that you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek.
Can we just pause there? I think we may have detected something that would have undercut this idea of Jesus being this great high priest. The idea that he comes from the tribe of Judah. What does that tribe have to do with priests? Like, you would think he'd be a Levite, right? Like, so maybe there is a narrative there about coming from the tribe of Judah, making the idea absurd of him being some like grand and cosmic high priest. But the author is saying, yeah, you know who also wasn't part of the Levite tribe? Melchizedek. Yeah. All right, go ahead, keep going.
There is on the one hand the abrogation of the earlier commandment because it was weak and ineffectual, for the law made nothing perfect. There is on the other hand the introduction of a better through which we approach God. This was confirmed with another, for others who became priests took their office without an oath, but this one became a priest with an oath because for the one who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. Accordingly, Jesus has also become the guarantee of a better covenant. Furthermore, the former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able for all time to save those who approach God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. For it was fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, blameless, undefiled, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other high priest, he has no need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for those of the people. This he did once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priests those who are subject to weakness, but the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever.
Okay, so we're kind of getting into the weeds of Torah here, and there's a dialogue with potential objections maybe grounded in Torah about Jesus and this idea that Jesus is a high priest. But at least from a macro level, one of the defenses of Jesus is that, Jesus is high priest. One thing that makes him superior to all priests that came before him is that he doesn't have to offer any sacrifices for his own sins before he intercedes for us and makes sacrifices for everybody else's, right? So this is a clear reference to Jesus being a sinless being. But then goes on to say even more than that, offered himself as a sacrifice, which has this cleansing effect on all people. And so there is this permanency to his role as priest and a permanency to the effect of his sacrifice. So there's this real deep, if some of the controversy that's maybe brewing in the audience that this author is writing to or speaking to is kind of rooted in Torah and questions about Jesus and the unfolding theology that they're uncomfortable with, and the author is kind of worried about them falling away, this author is willing to get in the weeds of Scripture and Torah to really make a case on their grounds. If he basically is saying, if you want to use this kind of priestly theology and this cultic practice and Torah, if that's kind of the grounds you want to live and dwell in, well, I'll reach into Torah, but I may reach a little bit deeper and go back to Melchizedek, and I'll reach in and we'll talk about specifically the sacrifices priests had to make starting with their own sin, and then I'll talk about Jesus, how he is sort of like and different. So it is sort of a masterful way of making an argument within the kind of texts and stories that may be sowing some doubt in Jesus as the author understands it. So I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting. Any comments or questions about this so far? One of the things that was really interesting to me is that I think I've shared before that there have been times where I've been in places of worship and served in places where the idea of women preaching was considered unfaithful, that was against the Bible. And one of the ways that people would often argue against it, or would try to make the argument for women to preach in those churches would be well, I mean, women can be engineers, they can be Olympic athletes, they can be in the highest leadership roles of companies. Why in the world could a woman not preach? And for those who are making the distinction theologically because of how they're reading a few texts in the New Testament, those arguments were never convincing to them, because it's making an argument based on sort of the world around them. But in order for them to be convinced, you really kind of have to go and hear it and use Scripture to help them read it differently. And so I remember talking with one person because very, very much feeling convicted that this place needed to open up the pulpit to anybody, men, women, anyone, and we looked together at Acts 2. We had looked at Galatians, where Paul says that in baptism there's no male or female, and that text was not convincing. But we ended up going all the way back to Acts chapter 2. I was so what's the most important, what's the way when you understand church, what's sort of a foundational, what's sort of the core building blocks of it? And had this description of the New Testament as a whole, but it started with the birth of the church at Pentecost. And so as I was kind of chewing on that afterwards, went back and was reading the Pentecost story and invited this person to come back and read it with me. And this was the thing that changed his mind. We were reading the story of the Spirit coming on the disciples at Pentecost, and people spilling out into the streets, speaking in tongues, and then Peter in the Spirit, stands up and explains to everybody what's going on. So in Acts chapter 2, we read together, what Peter says, to interpret to the crowd exactly what's going on as the church is being birthed as a Spirit-empowered people. Peter says this, in the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. And your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my Spirit, and they shall prophesy. And it goes on, and he's quoting from the prophet Joel, and using this to interpret what is happening, that this is a fulfillment of what God wants, and that the Spirit being poured out to sort of break new ground in God's dream for the world is the Spirit being poured out on men and women, and they shall prophesy. And so then I remember this gentleman who is an elder of our church just closed the book, and he was just like, of course, yes, like this is, but see, it was an argument from Scripture, right? It was, you had to go to the place that was of central importance, and reading within the text, finding the components of the story, and drawing out those elements that kind of made a case for the thing that was being debated there. That was what proved so effective. And I see the author of Hebrews doing exactly that. It was kind of like going back to the book of Acts to try to make a case for why church, when it is most faithful, is a place where men and women are able to preach, and that we don't stand in the way of the Spirit who is empowering any group because we don't think it's possible or shouldn't happen. If God's pouring out the Spirit and somebody's got a word to say, then we are impeding the work of God by saying, no, you can't. And that was really effective because it was an argument from within the Scriptures. So the author of Hebrews is exactly the kind of person who is fluent in the native tongue of these stories of Hebrew Scriptures and these characters to kind of bring to bear certain elements, give them the spotlight that it might help rejuvenate a certain imagination of Jesus. And it's really artful with what he does, even in how he talks about the priesthood. So that's probably a good place to end here. But anybody have any thoughts, comments, or questions about any of this so far? All right. Sounds good. Well, next week we're going to get into one of the real favorite chapters of Hebrews, the Great Cloud of Witnesses chapter, where it kind of does a history of all these people who have been kind of heroes in the faith, and we'll see people like Job and others and what they're praised for. But it's a masterful just survey of so many key and critical folks. And so anyway, we'll get there next week. So thank you all very much.